Hi, welcome to Love Brewing. I'm Richard. For my sins, I own the company. I would just like to spend a bit of time with you actually looking at what we're going to do in terms of making wine, beer and spirit. We have two common things which apply to all the products that we actually want to ferment. The first is cleanliness and the second is temperature. If we can get those two right, it's very, very difficult for us to get a failure. So what I'd like to do is just show you now at the start how we here at Love Brewing would start a fermentation. We're looking at the cleanliness side to start with. Once we've done that, now this, bearing in mind, this applies then for your wine, your beer and your spirit making and also your cider. What we will then do is, having demonstrated how we actually clean and look after our temperatures, we will then go into detail on actually making each of the three different types of products that we do. So to start with, we're looking at cleanliness. The first thing we've got to remember is that anything that comes into contact with beer, wine or spirit needs to be immaculately clean. Now we actually take it to another level. And what we say here is, let's make sure it's not only clean, but it's actually sterilised as well. All parts that come into contact are therefore sterilised. And what we use is, we have a cleaner steriliser, which is the same one that is used by the commercial breweries for cleaning the pipes. It's a chlorine-based steriliser and it's very simple to operate. Now the most important thing is to make sure that it comes into contact with all parts. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually set up the sterilisation process. Here we have a 25 litre bucket. As you can see, it's graduated on the front. That makes life a lot easier when we're actually measuring out. Now if your bucket hasn't got graduations on it, please put them on. Measure out 25 litres of water, mark it. Measure out 20, mark it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take approximately 5 litres of hot water. And as you can see, I've got a bit of a cheeky tap that pulls out, makes life a lot easier for me. This equipment is clean before we started. In my opinion, lovely and clean. Okay, because it's clean, we can obviously then do things a little bit easier than if this was all stained and horrible. I think it's really important to make sure that once you've done a brew, you really clean your equipment so it's all ready for you next time. As I said, we're just putting about 5 litres of hot water. I like to use hot water because the steriliser seems to dissolve that little bit better in the hot water, into the bucket. And we're almost there. Okay. So with 5 litres in the bucket, we're going to take the steriliser and we'd add a tablespoonful. I'm just going to sprinkle that in, make sure we've got plenty in there. And then I'm going to take the paddle, could be a paddle or a spoon, and we're just going to dissolve that and make sure that's nicely mixed in the liquid. Beautiful. And what we're going to do now is put all the things which come with our starter kit into the bucket. We've got the bucket lid fitted with a grommet. That's to take the airlock. We've also got a hydrometer, which is here. That's going in. We've also got a thermometer, which has come with our starter kit. All our starter kits include a hydrometer and thermometer. Most important things for beer, wine and spirit making. We'll go into detail about them later. We've also got an airlock and a red cap for it. And finally, we have the spoon or the paddle. In some of the starter kits, you'll get a spoon. In some of them, you'll get a paddle. So I'll put both in so that we can show you how that works. Now, in some of the luxury starter kits, you'll also get a trial jar, again, which we will go into detail about at a later stage. But I'm going to slot that in now as well. It's a bit awkward when we actually come to try and swirl the water around the bucket, because we need to make sure that all that water in there comes into contact with all parts of the bucket and the lid. So what I tend to do is, if I can find myself a nice, bright, clean, really clean cloth or sponge, we can then drop that into the liquid and we can just squeeze it around all parts of the bucket and the lid to make sure everything is being touched with that lovely cleaning, sterilising solution. The other important thing is I've got my hands wet. That can matter later on. So don't worry about getting your hands all covered in steriliser. Again, once you've done it, just rinse them off. The steriliser that we use takes about 20 minutes to be fully operational, to have done the job. You can use other sterilisers, the things like Milton. Some people use bleach, God forsake them, but there are other sterilisers which are available. But we think this particular one is a nice, easy one to use. That tub's going to do you 5 or 6 brews. You're looking at well under £2 for it, so it's not crown jewels. You'll get one of these included in most of the starter kits as well. The final thing, which we'll come on to at a later stage, is what we call a degasser or a mixing. This doesn't come with the starter kit, but again, I'm going to put that in there just to make sure that's sterilised as well. So all parts that have come into contact with the wine, beer or spirit are now being sterilised. As I say, this is going to take about 20 minutes. So while this is being sterilised, I just want to talk to you about temperature. So I'm going to move that to one side, and we're going to have a little discussion about temperatures. It's really important that we maintain a nice temperature. If we maintain a good temperature, the yeast will work really well. The yeast is the product in all the kits that will actually convert the sugar to alcohol. When it does that, it gives off CO2. But for the yeast to work really well, it has to maintain a really nice temperature. So we're looking for a temperature between 20 and 25. If we can maintain that sort of temperature, we'll end up with a really good fermentation. How do we do that? Well, obviously, we're looking at most rooms in most houses will be in that sort of area. But obviously, we will end up with a problem at certain times of the year. So in winter, obviously, you're going to get very cold mornings, you can get very cold nights. So it's essential to work as to what temperature you're going to be able to maintain. In the starter kit, you've got your thermometer, so you can use a thermometer in different rooms to see at different times of the day what you're getting. Now, as a general rule, we end up getting more questions about people asking how can they increase the temperature because the temperature in their house is too low. You've several options. The first, which is a really basic thing that can be done, is we can wrap the container in a duvet or a blanket. That's going to help to retain some of the heat in the actual bucket. With 3 products which are available to us. The 3 products I'm going to show you now briefly. Now, bearing in mind, these are not included in the starter kits. These are a separate purchase, so don't think that these are included. And I'll just get the 3 products. The first one that we can offer is a brew belt. And this, as you can imagine, is a belt that goes around the bucket. And for maximum heat, we would drop this belt right down to the bottom. For minimum heat, we move it to the top of the container. So if you're just wanting a little bit of extra background heat, leave it at the top. If you've got it in a real cold shed or garage or cold bedroom or something like that, then leave it at the bottom. Now, as I said, this is not thermostatically controlled. So again, we're going to talk about thermostatically controlled in a minute. The second option is a heat tray. The heat tray is a plastic, quite substantial tray that has inside it some bands that go through it, similar to what you'd expect on underfloor heating. It's incredibly economical, hardly uses any power at all. It will take 4 standard demijohns, it will take a bucket, or it will take a fermenter. And it's perfect for secondary fermentations as well when it comes to beer, which again we'll talk about at a later stage. Heat tray's fantastic, but again, not thermostatically controlled. So with both the brew belt and the heat tray, and I just hasten to add, I don't particularly like the brew belts. I think the heat trays are much nicer, but obviously they're a little bit more expensive, but well worth the investment. With both the heat tray and the brew belt, we would strongly recommend that you put it on a time clock. You know those clocks with the little pins that go in it? Get it to come on and off as you need it. Well, with the time clock, you can then set the heat tray and the brew belt to come on as and when you need it. Now, if you're not going to do that, then this is going to be on the whole time. And if it gets hot during the day, this is going to make it even hotter because it's on the whole time. It won't switch off. So it's really important to think in terms of the time clock option when you're using both this and the brew belt. Your third option is the immersion heater. And with the immersion heater, you have, and I'm sure many of you will have seen these before, you have what's called a fish tank heater, I think commonly known. Now this is preset to 24. They're fantastic. They really are good. If the temperature drops below 24 in your bucket, this will automatically kick in. If it goes above 24, it will automatically switch off. So it saves the need for any time clock or any worry about getting it too hot. Two disadvantages to the immersion heater. Obviously it's glass, so it can break, but also it's another thing that needs to be sterilised because this is going to go inside your liquid. There are two holes in the top of the bung, one for the lead and one for the airlock. That will go through the lid. We need to drill a special hole for it. That will go through the lid and drop into the liquid. And as I said, preset to 24. Now, one thing I ought to just mention, when the yeast is working, the yeast will give off heat. As it gives off heat, the liquid temperature will rise by 2 or 3 degrees, depending on how quick that fermentation is. So if your room temperature is 25, your liquid temperature is going to be 28. This is set to 24, so as long as your room temperature is less than 22, this will automatically kick in. Okay? So those are your 3 options on your additional form of heating in case you need it. What I'd just like to do is I'd just like to pop back to my sterilisation now. I just want to do another quick swirl round with liquid to make sure all parts of this sterilising solution are coming into contact with the parts that we'll be doing the fermentation on. So just quickly back to temperature again. As I've mentioned to you before, it's so important to maintain that temperature between 20 and 25. Now look, don't be worried. If you drop down to 18, you're okay. We're giving you a margin. So aim for between 20 and 25. If we drop down to 18, we're okay, so it's not disaster. If we go up to 27, it's okay, but not disaster. But we're saying between 20 and 25 because things can happen during the day in the house or the place where you're fermenting, which is going to cause it to go beyond those 2 limits. And therefore, by giving us that little margin of error, we're going to solve any potential problems. Okay, we've talked about sterilisation, we've talked about temperature, the need to maintain those. This is common to beer, wine, spirit, cider, anything that we're going to do. This is common to it, and we need to maintain these strict disciplines that we're actually putting into place here. We've been about 20 minutes now since we started. This sterilising solution's been working for about 20 minutes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pour it away. The steriliser is a chlorine based, so it is necessary to rinse it. So what I'm going to do is just pour it out now into the sink. In she goes. We've got our various bits as well, the thermometer, hydrometer, the airlock, the mixing spoons, and what I'm going to do now again, this is where the cheaty tap comes in so useful, because you can just run it round the edge, just making sure that we've got rid of all the chlorine based steriliser and that we're really nice and clean. Okay. Some people will ask me if they come to do something at a later stage, like check the temperature using your thermometer, or more likely, checking your hydrometer. Is it necessarily to go through all that sterilisation process again? No, it's not. This is glass and it keeps really clean. So all we need to do is put some really hot water on it, both the thermometer or the hydrometer, and then we can use them. So don't worry about having to go through the whole sterilisation process. It's really good to do sterilisation at the start because obviously we know that we've then got a nice benchmark. I'm just going to clean this lid off now as well. And all the bits which are in the sink. We are now ready to go. So what we're now going to do is we're going to break down now into the various parts. We're going to do a beer kit, we're going to do a wine kit, and then we're going to do a spirit kit. Okay, so we'll break off now. I think the first thing that we're going to do now is we're actually going to make a beer kit. You've got your starter kit, or you're thinking about buying your starter kit, and the kit that goes with it. Very much hoping that you'll go with ours, which is the Beerworks, and I'm going to demonstrate the Beerworks. So, inside the Beerworks kit itself, what do we get? Well, the most important thing is obviously the instructions. RTI, read the instructions. That's what I was told when I first started making my own beer and wine. Read the instructions. Yes, I've written them, and I would be most grateful if you would follow them, because it's taken a lot of time to get it right. Okay, so what have we got? We've got here a pouch with 3 kilos of top quality malt extract. This is probably one of the best malt extracts with a little bit of hops in it that you can buy. It produces a fantastic beer, which is going to be about 4% alcohol. Obviously different types will produce different types and amounts of alcohol. But this particular one, which is the Dragon Special Kentish Bitter, it's designed to be not too hoppy, but a hoppy enough to give it some character. So we've got 3 kilos of malt. We're going to put those 3 kilos of malt into some hot water. What we want to do is we just want to soften up the malt. If we try and pour that as it is now, especially if it had been a bit cold, try and pour it straight into our bucket, it's going to be really thick and very difficult to manoeuvre. So what I did earlier, knowing that we were filming, was to put one in some hot water. So we're almost ready to go on that particular part. But normally it would take about 20 minutes to soften up. Your sterilisation takes 20 minutes, so try and do the two together. As you start to do your sterilisation, put the malt in your hot water. So we've got the malt extract. We've also got some hops. East Kent Goldings are the ones that we use on the Kentish Bitter. We've got 50 grams of hops here. These are fresh hops, and these are going to go in slightly later in the fermentation. So we'll come on to that later. We've also got some priming sugar, which again will go in at the end. And we'll talk about that later. And the final thing in the kit is we've got a very, very special yeast. Now this particular yeast is one that is designed to give a really, really firm sediment, so that when we come to do secondary fermentations and we come to pour the beer, we're not going to worry about it all getting disturbed. It is a special yeast, it is a specific one, and most of the Beerworks kits, we actually use specific yeasts, which is one of the reasons why we end up with such a fantastic beer. I can't also emphasise the importance of the dry hopping. This is the hops that are going to go into the liquid after so many days, depending on which kit it is that we're actually making. So let's start. We've sterilised our bucket. It's all lovely and clean. We now take our malt, which has been stood in the hot water for about 20 minutes. I've got a pair of scissors. We're just going to cut across the top here. Get a whiff of that. That is stunning. Into the liquid. You see how thick it is, so you can imagine what it would be like if we hadn't actually added it to the hot water before we started. There's a lot of malt in here. I say a lot, there's 3 kilos. And that's all pouring out nicely. Now we want to make sure that none of it is left behind. So we're just going to squeeze as much as we can out of it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse it with some hot water. So in she goes. Nicely, babe. I'll empty that water out of the sink. Open the malt pouch. And then run some hot water in. We're trying to get as much of this liquid which is stuck to the sides out as we possibly can. The hot water obviously helps to dissolve it. And what I tend to do is to just give the pouch a bit of a squeeze to work the water onto the liquid, the malt extract, to get out as much as we can. And in she goes. And again, we'll keep repeating that until there's nothing left on the side of the walls of the pouch. This is quite hot, the water that's going in, so be careful with the pouch, because obviously the hotter the water, the more the pouch can affect the feel on your hands, because it's only quite thin compared with big plastic containers and what have you. It's also quite good, this, because we need to add a certain amount of hot water to the actual brew. What we're looking for is a start temperature between 20 and 25. So again, depending on what time of year it is, depends on how much you're going to have to add at the start. We're almost there. I don't want to leave any of this malt behind. It's like liquid gold. And one more, and I think we're done on this particular thing. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a mixture of hot and cold water. You can either use the pouch to do that, or alternatively a jug, or you can lift your bucket up to the tap if you're feeling particularly strong. It's quite easy using the pouch, to be honest, and also the other thing is, you know, that you're not leaving any of the malt behind. And in she goes. The malt extract, incidentally, comes from many parts of Europe. It's an actual blend of probably 4 or 5 different malts, not only from the UK, but as I say, from Europe as well. We've worked long and hard over a 3 or 4 year period to end up with a beer kit that really is probably one of the best on the market, provided you make it properly. And that's why I keep saying, RTI, read the instructions. What I would suggest now as well is, while we're doing this, we've sterilised earlier our thermometer and our hydrometer and our mixing equipment. So if we take our paddle and just give it a bit of a mix, helps to do that now as well, because we've got a bit more space left in the bucket. So we're giving it a good mix with the paddle. That thick malt, which is all at the bottom, gives us a chance to get that nicely dissolved. And at the same time, I would suggest that we also take a temperature reading on it. We're looking for that start temperature of between 20 and 25. Just put a bit more in. So we're just going to drop the thermometer in. And we're looking at 25, so not too much more hot water into that, because we don't really want it above 25. But more importantly, we're making sure all this malt, thick malt at the bottom, is having a real good mix. And obviously we've got the graduation on the outside of the bucket, so that makes life quite easy. And we're looking for a start volume of 23 litres. I'm just adding a little bit more cold water because, as I said, the temperature was 25, and really I like to try and start nearer to 20 than 25. Some people talk to me and ask me, what is the importance of water? Well, water is obviously, as you can see, one of the main ingredients in your beer kit. So it's really quite important that you have a quality water that you use. I have to say probably 95 to 97% of people that make beer, wine or spirit kits will use just standard water out of the tap. There are a few people who, because they've not got the best of water, will actually go out and buy bottled water, or go and get spring water, or will actually go to a friend's and pick up water from there. They've got a combination of things that they can do. I'm just making sure. There we are, perfect. We're on 23. Sorry, just back to that water. We use a combination. They'll go and pick water up from a friend's or whatever. I think it's really quite important. If you know you're in an area where your water tastes quite chlorine-y, is to have a taste of it before you actually start. Chlorine's not particularly good for beer. So have a taste of it before you start. And when you've tasted it, if you find it does taste that little bit chlorine-y, either pour it out, leave it 24 hours, and keep giving it a bit of a mix. As you mix it, that chlorine-y smell and taste will disappear. Or alternatively, don't do it that day. Leave it 24 hours, do it the next day. You'll find the water supplies do change quite considerably from area to area as well. You've also, as I said, got the bottled water that supermarkets do. Some of the supermarkets would do a bottle of water for about 12, 14p, something like that. So again, it's up to yourself, but 95% of people, as I say, 95, 97, will use ordinary tap water. So don't worry too much about it. So now what I'm going to do is just a final mix. Make sure it's all nicely dissolved. Going to check the temperature. And yeah, we've now dropped down to 22, which is lovely. Perfect. And what we're also going to do is we're going to do a hydrometer reading. Now with your starter kit, you will have a hydrometer and you'll have the jar that it comes in. Now you've two options with your hydrometer. You can drop this straight into the liquid and then take a reading. And what we're looking for is a reading across the liquid line on the actual hydrometer. Alternatively, you can drop your little trial jar in, as you can see there, and then drop your hydrometer in. As you can see, it's quite a tight fit. So you need to just give it a spin, and as you can see, it's dropping down. It's dropping down. We're reading across the water line there, or the liquid line, and it's showing 1042, 1045, something like that. Alternatively, for the people who've got the luxury starter kits, they'll end up with a proper trial jar. And that one, you can see, makes it a lot easier. We can drop the hydrometer in, just give it a twirl like that. Little bubbles sometimes stick to the side of the hydrometer and will stick to the glass jar and cause you a problem in terms of the reading. But again, we're reading across the liquid line, across there. We're at the bottom of the red. We're looking at about 1045. Start gravity. Start gravity of this particular beer, 1045 we're showing. Now the most important reason why we're doing a hydrometer reading, let me just explain first before I do that. The hydrometer is probably the only sophisticated piece of equipment that we actually have in our beer making. You're looking at about £4 for this, so we're not looking at crown jewels here, but it's value for money. Thankfully, it's glass, so you will break it from time to time, so we will get the odd repeat sale, which is a bonus. The hydrometer, it will measure the gravity of the liquid. Now the gravity of the liquid, basically what we're saying is how much sugar is present in that actual liquid. Now when we say sugar, It can be all sorts of combinations of sugar. In grape juice, for example, you get sugar. In malt extract that we used at the start, we get sugar. Some of the beer kits will ask you to add sugar to it. Sugar can be in the form of things like bananas. In beer, we might decide we want to add some chocolate or some licorice. All these things have got sugar in them, and all of them will ferment and turn into alcohol and will cause the hydrometer to read a higher level. When we say a higher level, the thicker the liquid, the more this is going to stick out of your container. So when we drop it into the liquid, the beer is going to be somewhere around here, around the red mark. If we're making wine, it would be down here. If we're making spirit, it's going to be down here. But if we're making beer as we are here, it's going to be somewhere around the red mark on the actual hydrometer. The hydrometer, as the yeast converts the sugar into alcohol, will drop further into our liquid. So as time progresses, this will go further and further and further into the liquid. And a really good gauge as to when fermentation is finished is when this is showing the same reading for 2 days. Now, the reason I've asked you to do a hydrometer reading at the start is threefold. The first thing is we need to make sure that all the liquid has been fully mixed. We don't want thick malt at the bottom of our container, because when we add our yeast, the yeast is going to struggle. It's in that thick liquid. It's going to struggle to grow. Now, yeast is really clever. It will actually do the mixing for us, but it will probably take 3 or 4 days to actually get going. So we need to make sure it's really well mixed. And the best way to do that is to give it a stir after we've done the first hydrometer reading, to give it a second stir. And if it shows the same, then we know we're finished. If it actually increases and goes further out of the liquid, we know we haven't mixed it properly. So keep repeating the stirring process until you get 2 readings the same. So we're looking at a hydrometer reading at the start to make sure the liquid's dissolved. The second reason is that if, God forsake, we end up with a problem and you contact us, the first thing we're going to say to you is, what was your hydrometer reading at the start and what is it now? And from those 2 bits of information, we can tell what has gone wrong with your particular brew. As I say, God forbid that actually happens, and it is very rare, but it is really important that we have that information. And the third reason why we want a hydrometer reading is that if we actually end up with a finished hydrometer reading and a start hydrometer reading, we can actually work out the alcohol strength. So the alcohol strength on this particular brew would be your start hydrometer reading from your finish. So let's take an example of 1070 start, 1000 finish. It's dropped 70 points. We divide that by 7.3. So it's going to give us roughly 10% alcohol. So depending on what we're doing, we can actually work out the alcohol strength of the liquid. So when people come and taste your beer or taste your wine or your spirit and they go, my God, that's strong. No, you can actually tell them how strong it is because you've worked it out for yourself. So we've done a hydrometer reading, we've also done a temperature reading. Now if you find your temperature's a bit out and you're not between 20 and 25, don't panic. You can move this bucket. If it's a bit too hot, move it to somewhere cool and the temperature will drop. Similarly, if it's too cold, put it somewhere warm, just get the temperature raised up. For a couple of hours, it's not going to hurt not adding your yeast. So do not panic. You're looking between 20 and 25 as your start temperature. What we're now going to do, having got this all ready, is we're now going to add our yeast. The yeast, all we're going to do, we're not going to rehydrate it, do anything like that, we're just going to sprinkle it in. In she goes. Oh, that was a good outtake, wasn't it? So we sprinkled the yeast in, and we're just going to give it a stir. Right. She is now ready to go, or he is ready to go, depending on how you treat your beer. We're going to put the lid on, and we have this product called an airlock, and the airlock is going to go onto the bucket lid. The airlock, as you can see, is half filled with water, and we're going to put the red cap on the top, and that's going to go into position there. And what's going to happen is we're going to leave the bucket now in a place between 20 and 25 to do our fermentation. Now with this particular kit we're looking at roughly 5 days, and then we need to think about adding the hops. So the bucket is placed in a place between 20 and 25 for the fermentation to take place. The airlock, all it does is it actually helps us to monitor fermentation. As the yeast converts the sugar to alcohol, it will give off CO2. The CO2 will go through the airlock. Now the idea behind the airlock is it's one-way traffic. The liquid, the gases will go through the bubbler airlock and out the other side, and it won't allow anything to go back in to actually infect our brew. The cap is purely a safety measure, and for you gentlemen that are making your beer, if you get it too warm, then this airlock will actually go and it will really get busy. The beer will actually then start to go through the airlock and it will shoot all over the place, and it will give little bubbles of liquid that will fly everywhere, all over the walls, all over your carpet. So the red cap is just designed to protect that and stop that from happening. Now if you find when the fermentation has started, or after about 24 hours, that there is no movement through your bubbler airlock, just have a look inside your container. As long as you can see things are actually happening, the chances are your fermentation is good. You've done a start hydrometer reading, so it's very easy just to drop your hydrometer in there and see whether it's changed. If, as I say, there's no movement through the airlock, it might be that the seal is not 100% perfect and gas is coming out through the seal, in which case just get a little bit of food grade Vaseline and wrap it round there and leave it in position so that you end up with an even better seal. As I say, you've done a hydrometer reading, so if anything goes wrong, you've always got that benchmark of your start point, and as long as the hydrometer is dropping into the liquid, fermentation is taking place. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that to one side now, and we're going to actually then come back after 5 days and see where we are with everything. Beer has now been fermenting for 5 days, and with the Beerworks kit we're now going to do some dry hopping. This is really important because this is what gives the beer some serious character. We can use all sorts of different hops on these, but we've taken certain types to represent the sort of flavours that we're looking for. The Kentish one that we're doing, we use the East Kent Goldings hops. Now the principle is the same whichever beer kit we're using. We take the sachet of hops, or the vacuum packed sachet of hops, just cut it, and ooh, wow, and we're just going to put those into a jug, get them all out, and what I want to do now is either with a knife or a pair of scissors just cut them. Because we're now going to pour, once we've done this, some boiling water on them, and that will just act almost as a little bit of a sterilizer. What we don't want to do is infect our brew with anything. So it's rather important that we just coat it with a bit of boiling water just to make sure if there are any infections we kill them. But we're just cutting these with the scissors or a knife, and then we'll put the water on. So those are nice and ready. We've cut most of them up and broken them up, and these will expand quite considerably. Now depending on which kit it is, for example if we're doing the Russian Imperial Stout, you'll actually end up with 3 different lots of hops that you're going to be using. And we're going to take about 500 mils of boiling water, and we're just going to cover the hops, and they are starting to expand as we do it. We'll just make sure they're all nicely coated with the water, like so, and then we're just going to pour the water away. We don't want that water going in, because if there are any infections, it could well be in the water. So just get rid of that water, like so. And as you can see, nice green fresh hops with a wonderful smell. And straight into our beer. So we'll just give it a little stir, although it's not really necessary because they'll just float on the top there and they'll start to expand nicely. I just want to make sure they're all covered with a little bit of the goodness of the beer. Lid goes back on, and what we're now going to do is we're going to leave this for a further 5 days. It's 5 days we have the hops on the bitter. On the lager it's 10 days. The Russian Imperial Stout, the IPA and all the others, just look at the instructions. They'll all give you different times. Normally, after we've added the hops, you've got 5 days roughly of further fermentation where the hops are getting the lovely bitterness and flavours going into the brew. We'll be back in 5 days' time then to deal with this and actually to do the bottling of it. All right, things are now starting to get quite exciting. Fermentation is just about finished. Well, it's finished. It's showing the same reading for 2 days on our hydrometer. So the hydrometer, we've got the same reading 2 days. Depending on which kit you're making, depends on what the gravity is, but that will be in the instructions, so have a look on the instructions. Normally beer's 1010, 1020, cider in the same sort of area. I'm going to deal with both beer and cider in the same bracket because we're all identical to what we're going to do now. Fermentation's finished, shown the same reading for 2 days. What we now need to do is we need to transfer the beer into our bottles or our barrel. And let's just talk a little bit about that first, because a little bit of thought needs to go into this. If we're looking for a fully carbonated drink, we have only one choice, and that is we have to bottle it. So if you're looking for a level of carbonation similar to what you would find commercially in, say, a Carling or a Magnier's or something like that, then the only way to achieve that is to actually bottle it. If you're looking for carbonation similar to what you'd expect in a pub, where you're having perhaps a pint of real ale and it's being hand pulled, then you can barrel it. The option is yours and the choice is yours. The advantage with barrels is it's only one thing to fill, one thing to sterilise, one thing to prime, one thing to cap, one thing to move around. You can then also draw off the amount that you want to actually drink. Whereas with bottles, you don't have that option. The barrel, as I say, makes life a lot easier, but you can't get that level of carbonation. With bottles, the other advantage is that you can put it in the fridge. So if you are making a lager and you want it cold, then you can leave it in your fridge. You'll get your level of carbonation that you're looking for, and you will get the chill factor as well. On the bottling front, what do we have as options? Let's deal with that first. Well, we can use any PET bottle. So anything that a sparkling drink has come in, Coke, lemonade, tonic, that type of thing, we can use those bottles for carbonating our beer. We can also use the brown PET bottles, which you might well have got with your starter kit. We've also got a 500ml standard brown pint in glass. We've also got the Rolls-Royce bottles, which are the Grolsch style bottles. These have the flip top lids and they can be reused. We've got those in 500, in brown and clear, and we also have them in 750 brown and clear. The standard pints, which are the 500ml, we only do in one size and one colour. Please though note that we do struggle to send glass by carrier. So if you're looking for glass options, then you need to call at our showrooms in Liverpool or Chesterfield to be able to pick those up. They're not available through the internet because the carriers don't like taking glass. With the standard pint bottle, this one here, the glass, you will need a capper, and you will also need the caps that go with it. The caps are the standard crown caps, And again, choice of colours, the most popular being the gold. That just sits on there. There's a magnet that holds it in place. That then sits onto your bottle. The cap goes into place and we just squeeze down. One cap on. It's as simple as that. The capper is actually a terrific piece of equipment. It's made by the Ferrari group and it's probably the Rolls-Royce of cappers. Again, not silly money, you're looking around £15–16. So those are your bottling options. Your barrelling options, we have two that we like to recommend. We have the standard 5.5 gallon barrel and we have the king keg, which is 6.5 gallon. Both kegs will hold obviously the standard brew, the 40 pint brew, the 23 litres, and both of them come with complete valve systems. Now the valve system that these come with, they have an option. You have a piercing pin inside it. This valve is designed to release pressure off from the secondary fermentation if it gets too high. I'm coming on to that in a minute. And you have a piercing pin in the top. This will also allow you to inject gas should you not have enough pressure in your barrel. And the way we would inject gas is to use the little 8-gram bulbs. You probably remember these from the old soda siphon days. Little bulb that holds 8 grams of gas. That simply slots into the holder and then we screw that down onto the valve and the pin will pierce that bulb and let the 8 grams of gas into your barrel, thereby giving you pressure. Now the big advantage with the systems that we do is all the pins are reversible, so that should you decide at a later stage to upgrade to using the big gas bottles, the ones which are called S30, which hold the equivalent of 30 of these bulbs, you can do. The system is in place. You don't have to go out and buy new, which you probably would with most other manufacturers that are available on the market. All we simply do is take the O-ring out, turn the pin over, and then we are able to use the big gas bottles. So the choice is yours. Initially, with the starter kit, you get the 8-gram bulbs, but it gives you the option to upgrade at a later stage. So we have the two kegs, with the 5.5 gallon and we've got the king keg. As you can see, with both kegs, they're made of heavy-duty plastic, or blow molded plastic, as they class it. This one's got the big cap, so the advantage being that you can get your hand in to clean it. Slightly more expensive. I personally like the 5.5 gallon barrel. I think it does the job. I think the need to get your hand in to clean it is not so apparent, because with the modern sterilisers and cleaners, you're able to clean them very well anyway. The king keg also has a top tap version, where the tap slots in the top, and this gives you the only advantage to this is that you can then stand the keg on the floor and you can still get your glass underneath to fill it. With these two, as you can see here, you need them to actually overhang the surface of the worktop so that you can get your glass in underneath. Just going back to the bottles, it's really important that you decide what size of bottle that you want. The reason being that once you open a bottle which has had beer in it, you will end up with the sediment at the bottom. And when you come to pour that beer, that sediment is going to get disturbed. So once you pour and you keep going to that position there, you can't go back and then back again, because all the sediment is going to get involved in the beer. So once you start going, you have to keep going until you see the sediment starting to come and going into your container that you're pouring into. So it's really important to work out what size of bottle you want. If you've got a 2-litre bottle, it means you have to drink 2 litres in one go. You can't turn it back, put the tap on, put it back in the fridge and save it for later. You've got to keep going. If you've got a bigger size bottle, then obviously what you'd have to do is put it into a jug first and then pour it from the jug into the glasses of the people who are wanting to drink it. We recommend 500 ml. It's the old pint, roughly, and it's a nice size bottle, and it's a good option to go with. As I say, with the bigger bottles at 2 litres, or even 1 litre, you've got a bigger container. And as I say, once you start pouring it, you have to keep going. With the barrel, you've got the option that you can turn the tap, and whatever you want comes out of that tap. You can switch the tap off when you've got enough in your glass. So again, another advantage to the barrel. Right, so we've looked at our options and we have now decided whether we're going to go for fully carbonated beer, i.e. we're going to bottle it, or whether we're going to go for semi-carbonated beer and we're going to barrel it. Semi-carbonated being like a real ale in a pub. We're just going to move these out the way now because obviously we've got a little bit of siphoning to do. And I'm just going to lift our bucket up onto the worktop. Now, we need to siphon off the sediment into another container with two options. If we're siphoning into bottles, I would strongly recommend siphoning into a barrel first, leaving the thick sediment behind. If we're going to go into a barrel, we can siphon straight from here, straight into our barrel. Now the siphon we're going to use, we have an extended tube. As you can see, that is extendable, so we can slot it in anywhere we want. And we can adjust depending on the size of the container. We've also got what's called a bucket clip, and the bucket clip snaps on into place there. And that clips onto the side of the bucket there. So that will hold it in place. Now the big advantage we've got here is it leaves our hands free. So the clip is really quite important towards doing this. What we've also got on the end of the siphon tube is what's called an anti-sediment fitting. Now this, if you can imagine, it's going to go straight down to the bottom of the bucket. The liquid is going to come in over the top. It's not coming in underneath. So the thick sediment in the bucket is going to get left behind. So we'll put our siphon into position, and then the bad news is you've got to suck. So as if turning the clock back to the old days when you used to have to siphon a bit of petrol out of a car or something like that, just give it a good suck and make sure that this is below the height of the bottom of the bucket. So give it a good suck and in. Obviously this needs sterilising first before you actually start. Okay. If the beer kits that you're doing, you will have on the beer kits a bag that goes on the end and has a little tie. Now that bag will stop you drawing up all the hops which are in the beer, because otherwise they'll start to clog up the siphon. If you haven't got the bag fitted and you get clogged up, all you have to do is lift the siphon out, tap it on the side, that will get rid of the hops, and back in it goes. When we get towards the end of the siphoning process, the siphon wants to be preferably coming straight down to the bottom of the bucket at the front end. And all we then need to do is just get something to go underneath the back of the bucket just to change the angle so that the liquid will then drop down to the front. All right, so I'm hoping that you're happy with the siphoning part of the operation. We've got the bucket clip in place, it's going to drop down and we're going to siphon into the bucket below. I don't propose to do that just now in terms of actually doing it. I'm assuming that you're all going to be capable of doing that. What we've now got is we've now got our cider or our beer in our barrel, in our bucket. And this one we're going to bottle. Now with the bottling process, we've also got available to us, we can put a straight tap on the bottom here. We've also got the little bottler equipment here that will allow us to bottle. So imagine that is fitted to your bucket and is in place. On the end, we've got a little valve. So if you can imagine, we turn the tap on. The beer will get into the tube, but it will not come out. We then get our bottle and we push our bottle down to the bottom and we just engage that valve at the bottom. As we push it in, the beer will start to flow. and the beer will flow, and once it gets to the height that we're looking for, all we need to do is pull the bottle away and that will stop the flow of beer. The advantage to doing this is because the beer is quite carbonated still, it will froth up in the bottle considerably. But because we're filling from the bottom upwards, we're not going to get the same level of the froth. So I hope you're with me on that. We're going to use this to press in the valve there, push that in there. That will start the flow of beer, and then as we get to the level we're looking for, we'll then pull it away. That will stop the flow. We can take the bottle away and then put the next bottle on. So imagine that in position. We've got the bottle at the bottom and we're going to press it in. So that allows us to fill our bottles much easier. It's called the little bottler, the bottling machine or the bottling device for doing the beers and the ciders. We've also got the barrel. Now with the barrel, we don't need to use a bucket. We can go straight, as we said before, siphon it straight from the fermenting bucket into our barrel. So if we're going to use the keg, we would just siphon straight into the keg. Where are we going to get our pressure from? That's the problem we're now faced with. Think in terms of the yeast. The yeast is such a clever little thing. He's absolutely super, or it might even be a she. Absolutely super, because it thinks it's done its job. It's converted all our sugar into alcohol. That's why we've got the hydrometer reading showing the same for 2 days. It's done its job. We're now going to trick it. What we're going to do is we've siphoned it off the sediment into another bucket. We've siphoned it into a barrel. Let's take the barrel. Now with the barrel, we get on our beer kits a pack of priming sugar. Now the priming sugar is best dissolved in a little bit of hot water. If we're going to bottle it, I'll come on to that in a minute. We're going to dissolve it in a tiny bit of hot water and put it inside our barrel with the beer. We're now going to seal the top of the barrel. Similarly, with our bottles, we've filled the bottles with beer. We're open. We're now going to take our priming sugar and we're going to put some of this in each of the bottles. Now, not going into too much detail, but on the front of the sachet of the priming sugar tells you exactly what to do. You dissolve it in 350 grams of water, mix the sugar in, you end up with 400 mils of water. Okay, so with that, we then take 10 mils per pint bottle and add it. But as I say, I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's all there on the front. So we've got our beer in our bottle and we're now going to put some sugar in there as well, liquid sugar. We're now going to seal it as well. So our barrel is sealed and our bottles are sealed. They've got sugar in them. Now what will happen is the yeast that thinks it's done its job and it's not going to do any more is going to wake up. As it wakes up, it suddenly finds the sugar present and it will then convert that sugar into alcohol. It won't change the alcohol strength of what we're doing by more than about 0.1%. So don't worry about that. You're not going to suddenly end up with a really strong beer. But what it will do is when it converts the sugar to alcohol, it will give off CO2. And the CO2's got nowhere to go. And because it's in this sealed container, either the barrel or the bottle, it will then build up pressure. And it's the pressure that it builds up that gives us the carbonation to get the beer out of our barrel with a good head, or the beer out of our bottle, or the lager out of our bottle, or the cider out of our bottle with a good level of carbonation. That's really important, but more importantly is once we've added the sugar and we've sealed it, we've got to leave it in a warm place for 3 to 5 days for the secondary fermentation to take place. And if you remember at the very start, we mentioned about heat trays and things like that. If you're struggling to maintain your temperature, you can use the heat tray to sit your bucket on, or sit your barrel on, or sit whatever it is that you've got it in actually to do. Some people say, can we not add all the sugar to the bucket and then put it into the bottles? Some people do that. I don't like doing it because you've got no guarantee of even distribution. Whereas if you put your sugar into each individual bottle, you know you've got good distribution. It's really important then to leave it for 3 to 5 days in that warm place to actually get that secondary fermentation going, to wake up the yeast, to get it started. Once we've left it for 3 to 5 days, we can then transfer it somewhere cool for it to clear. And if we transfer it somewhere cool to clear, within the space, normally about 2 weeks with our Beerworks kits, because the yeasts we're using are so good, they clear really well. Normally, within 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have lovely clear beer, which will be then ready for drinking. Now with the barrel, you'll tend to find that sometimes you'll get a little build-up of sediment behind the tap. So when you first open the tap to get the beer to come out, it might be a little bit cloudy. So first time, just put a little bit into, chuck it away. Once it's clear, you won't have that problem again. And remember, with the beer, we have to be really careful when we're actually pouring it. We don't want any sediment going into our glass. We'll be able to see it at the bottom, and as we pour it, we need to be careful. Your beer is ready, and it's really important, once you've got to the stage of actually bottling it and barreling it and getting ready to drink it, that you give some serious thought to what you're going to make next. So get your next kit ready to get going. And happy drinking.